Most people think of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt as men. Figures like Ramses, Akhenaten, or Tutankhamun dominate our history books. But what if I told you that some of the most powerful and transformative rulers in Egyptian history were women? Female pharaohs like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra weren't just exceptions to the rule, they were central to Egypt's success and survival, yet their stories have been minimized, their achievements downplayed, and their influence overlooked. And here's the most intriguing part: their rise to power wasn't accidental. These women didn't just adapt to a male-dominated role, they redefined what it meant to rule. But why have their legacies been so neglected, and what does their influence tell us about the hidden power structures of ancient Egypt? Let's uncover the real story behind the female pharaohs and why history has failed to give them their due. When most people think of ancient Egypt, the image that comes to mind is dominated by male pharaohs. Men who wielded absolute power and built towering monuments to their glory. This perception isn't entirely wrong, but it's also incredibly incomplete. The prevailing narrative has always leaned toward male dominance, and history books reinforce this by focusing on figures like Ramses the Great or Tutankhamun. Female rulers, when mentioned at all, are often framed as anomalies or footnotes, exceptions to the rule in a male-driven society. But here's the truth: Egypt's history wasn't just shaped by kings, it was also shaped by queens who ruled as pharaohs. Women like Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and Cleopatra weren't just placeholders or pawns in a patriarchal system. They were strategic leaders who often stabilized Egypt during times of crisis and expanded its influence in ways their male counterparts couldn't. So why are they overlooked? Part of it has to do with how history was written. Many of the records from ancient Egypt were deliberately altered or destroyed, often by male successors who sought to erase their female predecessors' legacies, and even when evidence of their reign survived, Western historians often dismissed these rulers as illegitimate or unimportant, perpetuating a skewed version of Egypt's past. This misconception persists because it's easier to tell a linear story of male-dominated power. Highlighting the influence of female pharaohs complicates that narrative, forcing us to rethink what we know about leadership, gender, and societal roles in one of history's greatest civilizations. But when we examine the evidence, it becomes clear that these women weren't anomalies. They were integral to Egypt's history. Let's explore why in the next section. Here's the truth: female pharaohs weren't rare exceptions, they were essential to ancient Egypt's stability and prosperity. The idea that leadership was exclusively male doesn't hold up when you take a closer look at the evidence. Let's start with Hatshepsut, often called the woman who would be king. Her reign in the 15th century BCE wasn't just a period of stability, it was one of Egypt's golden ages. Hatshepsut oversaw massive trade expeditions, built monumental architecture like her iconic mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, and strengthened Egypt's economy in ways that her predecessors and successors struggled to replicate. Then there's Nefertiti, a queen whose influence extended far beyond her role as Akhenaten's wife. Scholars now believe she may have ruled as a co-regent or even as a pharaoh herself after Akhenaten's death. Nefertiti played a pivotal role in Egypt's religious and cultural transformation during the Amarna period, one of the most radical shifts in its history. And of course there's Cleopatra VII, whose intelligence and political savvy allowed her to navigate the complex world of Roman politics while maintaining Egypt's sovereignty longer than anyone expected. Cleopatra wasn't just a seductress, as history often paints her. She was a tactician, a linguist, and a ruler who fought tooth and nail to preserve her kingdom in the face of overwhelming odds. The evidence is overwhelming. Female pharaohs didn't just inherit power, they used it to shape Egypt's destiny, and yet their contributions are rarely given the same weight as their male counterparts. Why? Because their successes challenged the traditional narrative of male dominance in leadership. But the evidence doesn't lie. When you examine the records, it's clear that these women were not only influential, but often more effective than many of their male peers. So why has history downplayed their impact? Let's dig deeper in the next section. The narrative of female pharaohs being exceptions isn't just wrong, it's a deliberate oversimplification of a far more complex reality. Women didn't just lead Egypt during times of crisis, they often redefined what leadership meant in ways that outshone their male counterparts. Take Hatshepsut again, for example. She didn't just rule in the absence of a male heir, she actively claimed the title of pharaoh, complete with the traditional regalia and symbols of kingship. She even had herself depicted as a male in statues and carvings to emphasize her legitimacy. This wasn't about pretending to be a man, it was about showing that gender didn't define her ability to rule. Then there's Sobekneferu, one of the earliest female pharaohs who reigned during the 12th dynasty. Sobekneferu didn't hide her identity as a woman, instead she incorporated both masculine and feminine imagery into her portrayal, signaling that her rule was about balance and strength. This duality wasn't a weakness, it was a statement of her ability to embody all aspects of leadership. So why did later records downplay their reigns? The answer lies in how power worked in ancient Egypt. Many of these women ruled during transitional or precarious periods, stabilizing Egypt when male rulers had failed. But once they were gone, their successors, often men, worked to erase or discredit their legacies to reinforce their own authority. This pattern wasn't unique to Egypt. Across history, powerful women have often been rewritten as anomalies or even villains, because their success challenged the societal norms of their time. By allowing the misconception of female pharaohs as exceptions to persist, it becomes easier to ignore the revolutionary impact they had on Egypt's culture, politics, and economy. These women didn't just lead, they thrived in roles traditionally reserved for men, and the reluctance to fully recognize their contributions speaks volumes about the biases that have shaped our understanding of history. In the next section, we'll look at the evidence that confirms just how integral these rulers were to Egypt's legacy. The contributions of female pharaohs weren't just significant, they were transformative. The evidence of their impact is scattered across ancient Egypt, hidden in the monuments they built, the policies they enacted, and the legacies they left behind. Hatshepsut, for instance, wasn't content to simply maintain the status quo. She orchestrated trade expeditions to the land of Punt, bringing back wealth and resources that bolstered Egypt's economy. The goods she secured, gold, ebony, and exotic incense, weren't just luxuries. They were symbols of Egypt's global influence. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari still stands as one of the most stunning architectural achievements of ancient Egypt, a testament to her vision and ambition. Nefertiti, often overshadowed by her husband Akhenaten, played a crucial role in one of Egypt's most radical cultural shifts, the establishment of monotheism centered around the Aten. While Akhenaten is often credited with this religious revolution, records suggest that Nefertiti was his equal partner, possibly even his co-ruler. Her prominence in artwork from this period, shown smiting enemies and performing rituals, proves she wasn't just a queen, she was a leader. Even Cleopatra, often reduced to her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, was a master diplomat and strategist. She spoke multiple languages, commanded the loyalty of her people, and maneuvered Egypt through a tumultuous era of Roman expansion. Her reign represents the final chapter of ancient Egypt's independence, and her legacy endures despite centuries of Roman propaganda that painted her as a seductress rather than a sovereign. The evidence is clear, these women were more than placeholders. They reshaped Egypt in ways that continue to influence how we understand leadership, culture, and governance. If these female pharaohs were so impactful, why were their stories minimized or erased? The suppression of their legacies wasn't accidental, it was calculated. Many male rulers who followed these women saw their reigns as threats to their own authority. Hatshepsut's name and image, for example, was systematically chiseled off monuments by her successor, Thutmose III. By erasing her from history, he sought to reinforce the narrative that male dominance was natural and uninterrupted. In Nefertiti's case, her reign after Akhenaten's death, if she ruled as pharaoh, was buried under the collapse of the Amarna period. Her religious reforms were abandoned, and later rulers worked hard to discredit the entire era, including her role in it. Even Cleopatra faced an active campaign of character assassination. After her defeat, the Romans rewrote her story to depict her as a manipulative foreigner rather than a competent and capable leader. This narrative suited their political agenda, allowing them to frame their conquest of Egypt as a moral and civilizing act. These efforts to erase or distort the achievements of female pharaohs served a broader purpose, maintaining the illusion of male dominance. By downplaying the power and success of these women, later societies reinforced the idea that leadership was inherently a masculine trait. But as modern historians and archaeologists uncover more evidence, the truth about these rulers is becoming impossible to ignore. The contributions of female pharaohs weren't just significant in their own time, they continue to challenge our understanding of leadership and power. Hatshepsut's reign proves that stability and prosperity aren't tied to gender. Her economic and architectural achievements were unmatched, and her ability to secure loyalty from Egypt's elite showed that competence, not gender, determined success. Nefertiti's prominence in the Amarna period demonstrates how women could wield power equally with men, even in radical cultural shifts. Her partnership with Akhenaten challenges the traditional view of ancient Egypt as a rigidly patriarchal society. And Cleopatra's political acumen, even in the face of Roman imperialism, shows that female leaders could navigate and influence the most complex global power struggles of their time. These women redefined leadership in ways that resonate far beyond their own eras. Their legacies challenge the biases of history and offer a more nuanced view of what power can look like. By acknowledging their influence, we not only reclaim their stories, but also gain a better understanding of ancient Egypt as a civilization that was far more progressive than we've been led to believe. But there's still one lingering question. What does this hidden history tell us about the stories we continue to suppress today? The story of Egypt's female pharaohs isn't just a forgotten chapter of history, it's a reminder of how power, leadership and gender have been misrepresented over centuries. These women weren't exceptions to the rule, they were integral to Egypt's success, shaping its politics, culture and economy in ways that defy the patriarchal lens through which history is often viewed. By reclaiming their stories, we're not just rewriting history, we're challenging the narratives that still shape how we view leadership today. What other contributions have been erased or diminished simply because they didn't fit the dominant narrative? What innovations, achievements, or revolutions might we be missing because they didn't conform to traditional ideas of power? Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, Cleopatra. They remind us that leadership isn't defined by gender, but by vision, courage, and the ability to make a lasting impact. And their stories continue to inspire us to question what we think we know about the past, and to recognize the overlooked voices that shaped it. If you found this exploration fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Let's continue uncovering the hidden truths of history, one story at a time.